Welcome into Case Files. It's a streaming show from our 11 Investigates team in which we dive deeper into some of the stories we spend weeks and months working on. I'm investigative anchor Melissa Andrews.
And I'm lead investigator Brian Duggar. This week we're looking into a pair of investigations. 3 missing brothers from a small city in southeast Michigan and the murder of a young girl from Monroe.
We start in 2009. It is May 24th. And 5-year-old Nevaeh Buchanan is playing outside of her home at the Charlotte Arms apartment complex. And that is the last time her family saw her alive. Just like that, she was gone, vanished without a trace. The community rallied, law enforcement launched a massive search, and everyone held on to hope that she'd be found safe. But that hope was shattered 11 days later when fishermen found her body encased in concrete along the banks of the River Raisin. Despite extensive investigations, her killer has never been brought to justice. And Brian, you talked to the Monroe County Sheriff this week. I know that you touched base with him several years ago as well. He said this is still very active. It's not a cold case.
Yeah, he actually described it as very, 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 very active. And he actually told me to stay tuned because there could be something coming up pretty soon.
We'll talk more about that case in just a bit. But first, as we're recording this, hearings are scheduled for next week that could end with the 3 missing brothers, the Skelton brothers, declared legally dead. Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton were last seen with their father in the small town of Morenci, Michigan. That was on Thanksgiving of 2010. John Skelton claimed he handed his sons over to an underground group. But police say they've never found any evidence to support that claim. Despite extensive searches and investigations, their whereabouts remain unknown. Their dad is locked up for unlawful imprisonment and is set to be released later this year. The boys' mother, Tanya Zuvers, continues to look for answers. Here is a look back at the investigation as it stood 10 years after their disappearance.
Never thought that we would still be sitting here at 10 years. I thought this would be resolved by now. But here we are.
There's a lot that they've missed, a lot that they should have been here for.
Tanya Zuvers will spend another Thanksgiving without her boys. She lives every day not knowing whether they're dead or alive or will walk through the front door.
Realistically, I know that chances are my boys are living in a better world than we live in. And that gives me comfort. As a Christian, I know that I will be reunited with them someday. But I still want that knock on the door that says, "Hey, Mom, we're home."
Investigators who know the evidence agree the boys are likely dead.
Think about what it's like as a mother to come here and have this memorial place.
Former Morenci Police Chief Larry Weeks.
There were some early indicators within the first week or so that led me to believe something nefarious had happened with the boys. It wasn't going to be a matter of finding them, alive somewhere. It was going to be much more nefarious. Something horrible had happened to them.
The boys' father, John Skelton, claimed he gave them to an underground group to protect them, but police never found evidence of the group. John is serving a 15-year sentence for child endangering and kidnapping, but could get released early. People in Morenci, a tight-knit, tiny town, remember the tragedy vividly. So much so, they keep the brothers' missing posters in their windows all these years later.
I think if I was him, I'd be afraid to get out of prison.
He needs to stay there. That's my opinion. Or he needs to tell someone what really happened, what he did with them.
John, what did you do to your kid?
And therein lies the problem. Investigators say John's never told anyone the truth about what happened to the boys, and tips have dried up over the years.
As law enforcement, we want tips that are going to be able to help, bring some closure to this.
With a release on the horizon, Tanya and investigators believe it's unlikely John will ever confess. So it's up to investigators to uncover more evidence to keep him behind bars.
Worst case scenario, he killed them. I don't know, it goes through my mind. Does he think that he's only going to do the 15 years and he's going to get out and they're never going to pursue him?
I think it's there. I think there's enough information there that, as I've said all along, I think this is a murder case.
Investigators won't reveal the evidence they've collected or whether it's enough for a murder charge, but they believe the answer to this mystery still lies in where John was in his blue Dodge Caravan on Black Friday, 2010.
His cell phone left his house about 4:29 a.m. on that morning. We have an indication that the phone pinged down near Holiday City, Ohio around 5:05, and then he's back home at 6:46. So you're talking about, hour and a half or so that he's got to do whatever he wants. And this is a very large, vast country area full of cornfields, rivers. It's difficult when you look at that vast area and the time he had to say, well, this is where the boys are at, or this is what he did with them. In my mind, that is where the tips need to come from. We need to know what he was doing during that window of time.
Obviously, it'd be very hard for people to think back 10 years and be able to say for sure they saw that van, but stranger things have happened.
It's that same dream Tanya holds on to all these years later.
We still have hope. I still have hope that in my lifetime, preferably sooner rather than later, I will have answers.
All right, and Brian, I talked to Tanya Zuvers on the phone the other day. She's got this big hearing coming up, ready to declare the boys legally dead. I asked her why do that. One of the reasons I think has nothing to do with her personal emotions. I do believe, and I have been told by investigators who have worked on the case, that they believe that they have enough evidence to charge John Skelton with murder for the boys. And this was told to me when I did that story 4.5 years ago. But their thinking was, if he's going to spend 5 more years guaranteed in prison on these other charges, why rush it? Because we only have one chance at him on a murder charge. So apparently they've been gathering more evidence. It will certainly make it easier for their case if the boys are declared dead by the time they would file any potential murder charges. But from Tanya's viewpoint, she said that she just feels that she owes it to her sons to truly acknowledge what happened, to do away with the lies that John allegedly told, to truly acknowledge to the boys and give them the respect that I know that you were murdered and you are not coming back.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad to say, but this will also probably give the mom a little bit of closure. And, look, I don't think anybody has any doubt that these boys are not still alive. And at some point, I think the mom just needs that closure.
She does, and when I talked to her there, she obviously still holds out hope, but she believes in her heart that the boys are dead. And I've always said, both of these cases, Neveah and the Skelton brothers, are two cases that You just want it to be solved. And what I think is most cruel about this particular case is that one person knows what happened to those boys, and that is John Skelton. He has never talked to us, but we did get some sound from him in prison in February of 2011, and here is what he said at that point.
Well, I'm in the dirt. I played with him almost every single day every single day that I was home, and I talked to him every single day. I miss making him pancakes.
Now, Skelton had told police that his then-wife, Tanya, they were going through a divorce, had abused the kids. Police cleared her of any wrongdoing. Here's more from John Skelton.
We loved each other for 10 years, and in that 10 years, she knows me pretty well, and she knows with her gut feeling, not with what people's telling her. I did not hurt the babies. I did not hurt our babies. The victims, just like she was. They were taken.
And the thing about John, he could actually get out of prison in November, correct?
Mm-hmm. On the current charges, he was sentenced to 10 to 15 years for unlawful imprisonment, one charge for each boy. So he is set to be released in November, and that's why I strongly believe that the police have been gathering evidence for a murder charge over these last 15 years. They didn't want to shoot their shot before they had to. Now, the timeline is here. He's going to be getting out for sure. No more appeals. That's all done. He's out in November unless they can keep him there now on murder charges for these boys. Now, one thing that I really learned when I went out and did that story is, you know, I was kind of always thought, like, why can't they find these boys? When you go out there, and I think that our drone video really adequately showed the massive amount of area where these boys can be. And I talked to Tanya, when I talked to her this week on the phone, she said she drives by this area every day to work.
Yeah, and
not knowing if her boys are in that area.
Right, and the thing about John, there is actually evidence that the night the boys disappeared, that he had driven into Ohio about 25, 30 minutes away, and they don't exactly know where he went. So when you're thinking about searching for these boys, it's a very large area. Very large.
The police really want people to pay attention to if they saw anything, because his cell phone records indicated that he was in Holiday City in his blue Dodge Caravan between 4:29 and 6:46 in the morning, the day after Thanksgiving. This would be Good Friday. Now, you know, I told you that these, the parents, Tanya and John, had been going through a divorce. Tanya was awarded full custody, but she gave the boys to John on Thanksgiving, and she never saw them after. So police want to know, what was he doing between 4:29 and 6:46 on Good Friday? He claimed that he gave them to this underground group to protect them from Tanya, but nobody's ever had any evidence of that. And do you remember several years ago, there were the bodies of 3 children found out west? Do you remember that? And it reignited hope that these were the 3 boys. Did you remember that? Didn't end up being them, but boy, when you talk about what closure it would mean to get them declared dead, that's what I'm talking about. As a mom, as a parent, can you imagine any time something pops up like this, bones are found, you think, could that, you know, be?
Right, absolutely.
That could still happen whether or not they're declared dead, I'll point out, but.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things, you know, looking into this case even more is I think at some point John had said he had handed the boys off and that they would, you know, come out once they were 18 years old. And as of like June of last year, all 3 of the boys would have been more than 18 years old at this point.
19, 21, and 23. And, you know, police believe they're likely dead, but it'll be interesting now. Let's talk about what's happening next week, right? We're recording here on February 28th, so March 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I actually am going to be going to this. It is in the Lenawee County Probate Court. It's going to be 3 days of hearings. We just saw this with Dee Warner. Her family was pushing to get her declared dead. So my understanding of what these hearings are is it's basically like a mini trial in probate court. I'm told that Larry Weeks, who is the former Morenci police chief, is going to be testifying. Also, One of the men I interviewed in my story, Detective Lieutenant Jeremy Brewer with the Michigan State Police, he's going to be testifying. And Tanya says, who knows, maybe we're going to learn something at this hearing that we've never been told before. That's going to be really interesting. And the other thing that's going to be really interesting is to see if John Skelton shows up to this hearing. And if he does, and if he doesn't want these boys declared dead, he's going to have to say why they're not dead.
Now, could he actually show up in person, or would it be actually like video from the
I think of course he can show up in person. There have been 2 hearings in relation to this. Tanya said one of them he showed up to, one of them he did not. So we just don't know. But interesting. What would he say about why they're not dead?
Right, absolutely.
Exactly. Okay. So that's coming up next week. We're going to have full coverage on WTOL. I would like to revisit this here on the podcast once that hearing is over. I think that'd be a good idea. Let everybody know in depth what happened. I don't think a decision will probably be made next week. We're not sure about that. Right. But we could learn some new information now all these years later. We want to stick in Southeast Michigan because there's another case that remains unsolved. Police found the body of 5-year-old Nevaeh Buchanan in June of 2009. This one stuck with me, Brian. I had just had my first child, a daughter, came back from maternity leave, and immediately went up here and started covering this beautiful little girl, Nevaeh Buchanan. She was found less than 2 weeks after she disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, this story really is chilling. Nevaeh was playing outside her home in Monroe, and then in an instant she was gone. No witnesses, no clear leads, just a child who vanished without a trace. Now, family and police launched an extensive search, followed every tip and lead, and held out hope that she would come home safely. But on June 4th, those hopes were shattered. A pair of fishermen found her body along the River Raisin, encased in concrete. More than a decade later, Nevaeh's case remains unsolved. Take a look back at the case as of November of 2021.
We're not a community where we have a lot of heinous crimes, a lot of murders. Things happen here, but not to that level.
I can't fathom that, how anybody could abduct and murder a small child.
On June 4th, 2009, a community's worst nightmare became a reality. Fishermen found 5-year-old Nevaeh Buchanan's body buried under concrete along the River Raisin, just outside the Monroe city limits. The manner of death was shocking. An autopsy report obtained by 11 Investigate shows that the young girl died either from having her face pressed into the ground or by being buried alive.
The detectives that were on this case had children at or near her age when this happened, and I'm confident it had a blow on them.
Monroe County Sheriff Troy Goodenough has been with the department for more than 30 years. He witnessed the strain the case put on the community and on his office.
I can tell you the impact it had on the emotional well-being of our organization was significant.
The day before Memorial Day 2009, Nevaeh was riding her tricycle outside her Charlotte Arms apartment in Monroe. At some point, she was seen near a neighboring playground. Later that evening, her mother went to look for her, but she was gone.
This is the original missing report. This is the death certificate.
Risa Smith, a distant relative, is one of the hundreds of people who searched for days for the young girl with the big smile, the girl whose name is Heaven spelled backwards.
There's not a day that goes by that I do not wake up and think of Nevaeh and what she went through and how she felt, and I can't understand it.
Smith, who has a criminal justice degree, has spent years looking into the case, compiling binders of notes and even interviews. Her quest for justice, she says, likely played a part in her divorce.
I just have a hard time understanding how anybody, I still get emotional after 10 years, how anybody can abduct and murder a 5-year-old child.
It is a very sick or disturbed person we're looking for. A person that is able to abduct and murder an innocent 5-year-old child.
In the days after Nevaeh's murder, police named several persons of interest, including sex offenders George Kennedy and Roy Smith. Both men were friends with Nevaeh's mother. No arrests related to the murder have ever been made. There are, however, still persons of interest.
I want to say yes, and I say that net has been widened. What we don't want to do, and I'm confident it's been done all along, is we don't want to have a narrow focus.
While investigating this case, 11 investigators talked to a resident of Nevaeh's apartment building. That woman, who is not being named to protect her identity, said she witnessed Nevaeh letting air out of the tire of a black vehicle the day before the girl disappeared. Now, hours before Nevaeh was abducted, police responded to a report of a man exposing himself to children at a nearby apartment. The suspect was driving a black Grand Prix. Investigators have not publicly tied a black car to Nevaeh's abduction, but when detectives were told of the apartment resident's story by 11 investigators, they immediately interviewed the woman.
Our approach in this case, no one is ruled out. And again, that's not a negative to those folks. I'm just saying is if I come out here today and say person A is ruled out, now I'm undermining what these detectives are doing when they're analyzing this data.
One of the biggest mysteries is how a young girl outside playing with other children could simply disappear.
No one said they heard a kid crying or screaming or asking for help. Did she know this person? Because to everybody that we talked to, not one person, including her preschool teacher, all kind of shared the same story, that she was a pretty shy kid. She wouldn't just walk up to a stranger.
It's always been on a detective's desk. There's always been activity related to this investigation.
Multiple times during the interview with 11 investigators, Sheriff Goodenough expressed optimism, even confidence, that the case will soon be solved.
We know there's people out there that have the answers we're looking for. We just have to plead with them to help us, partner with us to solve this case.
He understands the community's impatience, but says his detectives are using new tools to go over old evidence and old interviews.
So we're dissecting this investigation into very small parts, and we're tackling each part independently.
Nevaeh Buchanan has not been forgotten.
Don't refer to her as the girl buried by the river. She was 5. She had a life. She was a person. She was a human being. She wasn't just the girl buried by the river. What would she have been doing? Would she have been, biting at the bit to get her driver's license? Would she have been excelling in high school? Where would she be now? What would she be doing today? And it's just things that we'll never know. So I feel like the only thing we have left to give her is this justice. This is the last thing we can do for her.
So Nevaeh Buchanan, I mentioned this one was one that really struck me. I know you as well. You covered this case, just revisited it a few years ago as well, right?
Absolutely. I talked to Reza Smith. She's a cousin to Nevaeh, and she's always been heavily involved in this case. And
I remember she had tons and tons of binders. She kept everything.
She had binders and binders when I met with her, and she actually said, she's divorced, and she believes that one of the reasons she's divorced is because she's been so obsessed with trying to find answers, for the family and find out what exactly happened to Nevaeh.
Police always want to start with the family. What I remember when I went up there and covered this, I remember a grandmother being involved. The mother was there. She thought that Nevaeh was maybe playing in another apartment at this time. Through the course of the investigation, it was revealed that her mother, Jennifer, had associations with a few sex offenders. And they were initially suspects here, which I think everybody thought, okay, that's the direction we're going. We've seen this play out before where, there's maybe not the best situation here. Mom's hanging out with some dangerous people. This is going to be it, sex offenders, boom. But it didn't go that way.
No, it didn't. And there were actually 2 men very early on, James Easter and George Kennedy, who were actually named as persons of interest, and they both had a dating relationship with the mother, and they both had, I mean, they were sex offenders. And there is also a third man who later came along who also had some unsavory things in his background. So there was no shortage of suspects early on.
None of these people have ever been charged. Let's talk about the finding, the discovery. So Neveah was found by a man named Guy Bickley and his father, Lowell. Tell me about that again.
Yeah, so they were fishing along the River Raisin, and there was this concrete patch. They were kind of using it to step on to get from one place to another along the bank, and it gave out when the one guy stepped on it. And then he said he thought he smelled, maybe there were like dead fish or something that, but when he looked down, he could actually, you know, see portions of a body, and then that's where she ended up being. And one of the interesting parts about that along the bank, they've actually cut that area away, so it's no longer there. So there's not the memory of, you know, where this little girl was found, and there can't be people coming along and just kind of gawking.
Now, she was found to have like dirt in her lungs, which means she was alive when she, you know, for dirt to be in your lungs, that means you're breathing. Basically, she was buried alive in some way or asphyxiated by this dirt. Did they ever find any evidence of sexual assault?
Yeah, so the coroner, regarding the dirt, you're right. And the coroner said he couldn't determine whether she was held down in the dirt or whether she actually was buried alive. And when it comes to sexual assault, I don't think there's ever come out any information about whether she was or she wasn't. But I think there is somebody involved in the case who told me when I was looking into it, like, look, this is a 5-year-old little girl. Most of the times when they don't disappear, there's usually a reason why, you know, somebody's trying to do this.
And it doesn't mean that that wasn't the intention. Like we saw with Sierra Joggin, we've seen it with other cases. It could mean that was the intention for a kidnapping, but maybe there wasn't time or the person was interrupted or something like that. What is your impression of where the community support continues now? And is Risa still, I know she was administrator of the Facebook group Justice for Neveah. Is she still actively searching? What's going on with that?
She absolutely is. And I talked to her this past week, and she said she had just been in touch with the mom to try to figure out whether there's been any updates. And there really hasn't. She was obviously interested in what I had to say that the sheriff had told me, that this is still very, very active, and they're hoping for, you know, to make some sort of announcement or breakthrough very soon.
One of the things I think that you're so talented at doing, I mean, you really dig into these cases when you look into a cold case, and you found a new person that gave you information the last time you looked into this, and we just saw that, and it has to do with seeing Neveah before her disappearance. You shared that information that we just saw with the sheriff's office.
Yeah, and they did not know this information when I took it to them. Yeah, I had found a woman who was in the apartment, and she had seen Neveah outside the previous day before she disappeared, kind of playing with cars, letting air out of the tires. And there was this black vehicle that she seemed to be messing with, and this woman did not recognize the vehicle. I mean, this was something where she said, yeah, I typically recognize the cars that were in the parking lot because I lived there, and if some strange car was there, I would know that. And she did not know this one, and Neveah happened to be messing with the tires in one of these. And the interesting thing about it being a black vehicle is that the same day, right down the road, there was a man who exposed himself to 2 children in a different apartment, and he was driving a black vehicle. And the kids are actually able to give law enforcement a partial plate number, and they were
Wow.
able to track him down and charge him with that.
And they knew about that at the time Neveah disappeared, the guy in the other black vehicle, but the missing link was that the woman in Neveah's apartment complex had seen the tire situation.
Absolutely. They did not know that she had seen Neveah in the parking lot messing with cars and that it was a black vehicle. I don't think, at least they haven't told me whether that was the same black vehicle.
I was just going to ask, when you give police a tip like this, do they tell you what ended up coming out of it? Because obviously that's significant. Similar to sex offenders being over here in the picture, a girl going missing, you think, okay, man exposes himself down the road, black car, missing girl. Do you get the results of this tip that you gave to the sheriff's office?
I mean, I should, right? I mean, because I give them this tip, and it's kind of, police agency by police agency. There have been some that I've worked with in the past, and specifically, I think about the Nancy Eagleson case down in Paulding County. I mean, there were things that they've shared with me about that case, and I gave them tips also, and they came back to me, but in other times they have, but other times for whatever
Well, I will say, if they're not telling you that it was nothing, then maybe it's something.
Absolutely, because you're right. But in this case, they have not told me one way or another.
So what is your take on what the sheriff told you this week? He's told you this before. We're very, 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 very close. Do you believe that?
Yeah, when we did the story and we interviewed him at that point, Sheriff Goodnow, he told us very similar verbiage, right? That, we're not going to tell you what playbook we're working out of. We're not going to tip our hand about what's going on, but we can tell you we believe we're very close. And, I did this story, it was about 3.5 years ago at this point. I mean, he did sound very optimistic on the phone, and so I obviously want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, I mean, I do believe he's optimistic, and I do believe, certainly, in their mind, they do believe they're close. I mean, DNA has come so far.
I was just going to ask, do they have DNA? Do you know?
I know that they have things that they were testing, and that there is not a lack of evidence.
And I really think for a sheriff's department like this, for this little girl, and you touched on this in your piece, it's been a heartbreaking mystery that everyone wants solved.
Absolutely.
It's not for lack of trying.
Yeah, when I talked to the sheriff back in 2021, he had just come into office at that point. He had worked with the sheriff's department, in the sheriff's department previously, but he had just been elected sheriff, and he told me that coming in, this was a huge priority for him because, look, a 5-year-old girl disappears and is found encased in concrete. I mean, the community really, really cares about that. So, I know they're working as hard as they can.
Especially when they search for her for so long. A lot of times when these cases happen, families deal with these things in their own ways. How have you been received? Do you think sometimes families get exhausted of the media coverage and talking about it, and they all heal in their own ways. What has this family been like?
Yeah, and I think that is the case with Nevaeh's mom. I mean, I don't think she wanted to talk to me initially, and I really didn't have any type of real conversations with her. It has been through Riza and other people in the community, but yeah, and you think about the mom, you have a lot of sympathy for her, of course, because even back then there were people blaming the mom because of the people she had dated previously. Why would you have them around your child? And there were people even accused her of somehow being involved in all of this. So of course she's very guarded with what she wants to say, and I'm sure maybe, I don't know, I can't speak for her, but does she feel guilty about anything? I don't know.
So we have the hearing coming up in the Skelton case to get the boys declared officially dead next week. As far as moving forward on this case, you're just waiting to hear from the sheriff about this really good feeling that he's got.
Yeah, I mean, we're just waiting to hear, and you know, I am always kind of optimistic when it comes to this, and like I said, there's so many advancements in DNA and forensic technology, and you know, I have to believe at some point they're going to get a hit on something that's going to crack this case.
DNA really provides a lot of hope for cases that are even much older than these. Thanks for joining us for this week's 11 Investigates Case Files. For lead investigator Brian Duggar, I'm Melissa Andrews. We'll see you next time.